Russell Sr. and Caleb Phillips present their work done so far on a survey of MetroFi's service area.
Okay, I'm Russell Sr. and my collaborator is the guy with the baseball cap there, Caleb Phillips. And we're going to talk a little bit about a project we've been working on for the last couple of months involving testing the performance of the MetroFi network. So we're going to start out, I'm going to start out talking a little bit about the history of how this got started, and then a little bit about how we've performed our study, and then some sort of preliminary results that have some caveats involved. So MetroFi, of course, what many of you know, got the contract with the City of Portland last summer, and part of the contract was that the network is going to be deployed in stages. So there was going to be, the initial stage was that they were going to build out a proof of concept network. Some independent third party was going to come in and test the network, and then once they got that, the test was accepted by the City of Portland, then MetroFi could roll out the rest of the network. So as part of that, sometime in November, the city issued the RFP for the testing project. And I heard about this through Caleb, who had heard about it from at Portland State. Somebody, Logan, the city project manager, had come to somebody at Portland State, Martin Massey, and said, please bid on this, basically.
Yeah, there was something else about this demo proposal.
Oh, right.
The PSU BART, the students wanted to do a demo of the cool things you can do with a municipal network. And so then there was the testing RFP too, which he kind of came to me and said, hey, we should write a proposal for this. And I said, okay.
So that's how I had heard about it. And I thought, that's great. That sounds really cool, because obviously one of the parts of the test would be to drive around and map out the network. And I had just spent basically all fall and part of the summer doing that, looking for personal telco nodes that we hadn't known about. So I had all the gear basically ready to go, and I could sort of immediately see how to do the project to test the things that the city wanted tested. So I thought, this sounds like a great idea. And the only drawback was that we had like a week to get the proposal in, and neither Caleb or I had ever bid on a city contract before. And there was, copious verbiage. And basically what it boiled down to is that our proposal didn't look that great. I'd say we didn't have a canned solution, and it wasn't that appealing a proposal. Even though obviously, we're superior.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah. But so a month goes by and they pick somebody else, which is fine. But in the process, we've gotten intellectually engaged in the problem and how to measure this and test it in a sort of a robust way, so that you got an answer that was reliable, et cetera, et cetera. And so Caleb and I were annoyed that we didn't get the project. Not because there was anything wrong with uptown services. We don't know really anything about uptown services, except that they're from Boulder, Colorado, and maybe they're good and maybe they're not, and we just have no way of knowing. But we were mostly annoyed because we weren't going to get to have the fun of doing the project and learning things about the network and so forth. And so we were kind of carping about that one day on a roof, actually. And I mentioned to Caleb, well, we could just go ahead and do it anyway. And this had all sorts of appeal. We can, we're going to have the fun that we wanted to. We don't have to do the parts of the project that weren't so appealing.
We were making money on the proposal that we did was like basically gear plus minimal time. So
right.
We were never doing it for the money.
Right.
We thought it'd be a fun project.
Yeah.
So might as well do it in.
Exactly.
The problem, you didn't charge enough
That's right.
So basically our motives for doing it were the fun, fact generating. We're going to go out and measure things that people hadn't measured before at that point. And then also sort of as a potential check or confirmation of whatever the official testing report comes out with. So, you know, we can compare them afterwards. They're done completely independently. And you can see, well, are they the same or not? Okay, so now that's basically the history of it. And we started, so now the rest of this mostly is going to be me drawing pretty pictures on the screen. This is an open source GIS package called Quantum GIS, which I just learned how to use about 2 weeks ago, and put all of our data on it. So this is digital ortho imagery from USGS, and you can see familiar downtown if you're familiar with the Portland geography. Downtown Portland over here, Burnside Bridge, Morrison Bridge, Hawthorne Bridge, Markham Bridge, Ladd's Addition over here, so there's Hawthorne sort of across the top of that.
What is this, Russell? Is this Creative Commons?
What?
Are we
Yeah, I don't know.
now?
There's a plug-in for copyright thing, and they had this gigantic, huge GIS thing that was ugly. So, Lloyd Center up at the top. That's the Hollywood Fred Meyer up there. I-84 going through Willamette River, obviously. Okay, so the first thing we had to go on was the testing RFP that was given to us by, that we got from Logan or the city or wherever we got it, had a set of access points. There were 67 of them, and as indicated by the green dots here. You can tell that, see, they're more densely spaced downtown. They're also deployed primarily on 2 axes, along 3rd and Broadway, and then there's this cluster up here, sort of by the library. These 2 ones are on opposite sides of the library. And if at some point you want me to zoom in on something in particular, I can do that. They're a little bit more sparse over on the east side. There's some up around Lloyd Center.
You can see that mostly they follow arterials.
Right. There's a whole string of them that go down 20th right there. The east-west ones are slightly less clear, although there's one obviously going down the street.
Russell?
Yeah.
Just empirical data, you've actually located these?
Okay, so so they provided the GIS coordinates for the APs. Come to find out later, they weren't quite so accurate. So what we did initially was we wardrobed the whole territory. And we were using let's see, I'm going to skip ahead here. We're using the map that MetroFi provides, where they show their green areas that obviously imply that's where their coverage is. And Caleb and I basically drove up and down streets about 210 miles over like 3 days or something, maybe even more than that. Basically every publicly accessible street.
And parking lots.
And parking, yeah, we went through some nice parking lots as well. And then one of the cool things is since the bus mall is shut down right now, we could actually go all the way down 5th and 6th, which I hadn't done in years and years. Let's see. So in the process, we were able to identify where the access points were, what their BSS IDs were, essentially their MAC address for the radio. And what we discovered was 2 things. One is that they've actually added 5 access points since the RFP that were beaconing MetroFi free, which is all I was looking for. Pretty much all the Sky pilots, when they're on, they have one ESS ID is MetroFi 3 and the other one's premium. And as far as I know, they're running off the same radio. So there's 5 new ones. There was one right here, which is right off Pioneer Square. So that one's on the north side on Broadway, and they stuck another one on the south side on Broadway. This one is like right across the street from City Hall. This one is at Grand and Hawthorne. There's a little anecdote about that too. Sometime during the fall, remember we had the big windstorm? I was coming off the Hawthorne Bridge and rolling down to make my left-hand turn to go home, and it was like blown over at about a 30-degree angle.
That's quality.
And let's see, that's at 12th and Belmont, and that's right by Buckman School. So that's one of the things we figured out.
What's the SSIDs that are using?
MetroFi Free and MetroFi Premium. Those are the only ones. There's some, when the ones that aren't turned on, I've noticed they have SkyPilot, such and so. I don't know. We were only looking at the ones that were turned on. So. The other thing we discovered was that, at least when we did the stumbling, that 2 of those, of the original 67, weren't actually beaconing at all. They were present, they were in the RFP, but they weren't emitting beacons. However, since they were in the RFP, we from then on, we just assumed that that's an area that they should be covering. And so, like,
No beaconing in any of
No,
services, right? Free, premium, anything?
nothing. Well, here's the way we approached it was we looked for the MetroFi premium stuff. And I'm not sure, this is now a month ago that I did this, whether we tried to identify whether they were doing anything else. Because basically what I did is I get a location from the stumble data, and then I match that with one of the locations, that we've been given. So that's how we identify. So in the end, we basically considered the network that we were testing to include the 72 access points, including the 2 that weren't on. And all this stumble data was collected toward like the last week in February.
But did you find any other ones of theirs, like dark ones?
Oh yeah, I'm sure, but I wasn't looking for that. So
because I know
you see SkyPilot. If you look on Wiggle, you'll see SkyPilot stuff all over.
Well, I looked. I see this map and I see the locations, and I know I just drove down 17 going towards Selwood, and the whole road, about every mile or so, there's splits.
Right. Oh yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah, they've rolled out a whole bunch that are turned
But
off.
they're not. Yeah, they're not turned on. They're waiting for this proof of concept test to jump that hurdle, and then they can switch them on. I assume they're all, they're up and probably operating and they're testing and so forth. Okay, so let's see.
Russell, do you have a specific parameter that was given by the city?
I will get to that eventually.
Okay.
So, in the process of doing this, we'd identified where all these things were. So now we had the set of 72. The first thing I started to do was I had an algorithm basically that gave me the stumble data gave me a location. We had the location of these things. And I had an algorithm to basically match them together what the nearest thing was. And when we did that, we discovered some of them were wildly off. And we went to go look, and sure enough, like the city had given us, in one case, the access point was like 2 blocks away from where the GPS location was. So as a consequence of that, I drove around in 2 days, once in a car one afternoon. I did the whole east side, and I drove to each one with the GPS and coded a mark there. And then I had pretty uniformly 15-foot precision on that. And then another day I rode my bicycle downtown, so I didn't have to deal with parking so much. And I did the same thing. The problem downtown is GPS is horrible downtown because of all the buildings. And you get multi-path bounces, and your position's way off. And so it almost becomes useless. So what I ended up doing is remembering where I'd been, where I'd seen the thing. I went to Google Maps and I picked the corner. I could see the light pole or where the crosswalk was, and I coded the location for the access point from Google Maps, almost uniformly. So the positions of all of these is really, almost uniformly really good. I mean, within probably 2 or 3 feet of the access point. Let's see. Okay, that was my everything now.
So for your 30
Okay.
foot dot on the map.
Yeah, well, sure. If you zoom in though, the dot stays the same size, so the ground gets bigger. Okay, now I'm going to show a little picture. Oops. Right here. So all we had to go on at this point was this piece of poster board with a map on it to define what the proof of concept, where this network was and where we should be testing. And here we've got this thing standing, in front of Matt Lamp and Potter and Saltzman and Chuck Haas, I guess. And if you, let's see, I can show a better picture of that. Zoomed in on the downtown, you can see these little, well, especially over here, you've got these arcs of green shaded area. If you take their helpful scale here, you see that's 1,000 feet. And if you measure it, the radii of each of these access points on this side of town is 1,000 feet. So we're thinking, okay, they're claiming their coverage is 1,000 feet. We looked at the contract language to try to see how they define the proof of concept area, because we wanted to be able to sample the proof of concept area, take a random sample, and do our test based on that random sample. But if we didn't know where the proof of concept area was, we didn't know where to sample. So now they're a little bit more circumspect about the coverage downtown. They don't show the big circles. They basically show these axes down the streets. So, and I'm going to blast right past that. So we proceeded to start. Let's see. I get confused with my other dots. Okay, so from that we basically said, okay, well, we're just going to treat everything within 1,000 feet of any access point as part of the proof of concept area, even though it's a slight exaggeration for downtown. So on the basis of this, we did a random sample. Basically, we took a bounding box around all these points. And we did a random sample where there was equal probability of any particular location within that bounding box being selected. Okay. Then we basically eliminated the ones that are at the river or outside 1,000 feet. And let's see, I'll turn those off.
Sensor.
Okay, and I'll turn off the oops, that one. So now we're not seeing the access points. These are all about 490 locations that are within 1,000 feet of an access point. Okay, now it's getting closer to the time when we're actually going to start doing measurements. And we really have to know where we're supposed to be making measurements. So the obvious candidate to tell me where that was, since it wasn't in the contract, as far as I could say. Basically, well, here, I'll get to this. I basically emailed Logan and asked him, well, where's the proof of concept area? And he pointed me at the list of access points in the RFP. And I said, well, a list of access points doesn't define an area, there's just dots. And what area you're talking about. And so eventually he told me, oh, it's 500 feet and not 1,000 feet. So if you look at what the city is having tested as their proof of concept area is actually those little blue dots. And all the orange stuff, you're on your own, basically. So we have a little gap here. Now, one of the things you notice right away is there's no direct coverage on the bus mall. Of course, it's under construction now, maybe that's reasonable. And again, this isn't that really that, you know, when they roll out when they roll out the full network, it's quite possible they're going to be filling some of these holes in. I know I've seen one somewhere around there recently. But we had our 490 measurements, or measurement locations. Now the idea was not to measure all 490. The idea was I knew we were going to have to throw some away that weren't in the coverage area. We were going to start at the top of the list and work our way down until we got as many as we needed and then stop. The problem with that is logistically, you know, point 1 might be down here and point 2 might be up here and point 3 is over here. So logistically, it's a lot easier just to go to a nearby location instead of, you know, you're potentially introducing a bias in how you're selecting them, and that's potentially affecting the reliability of the sample that you've used, and therefore the conclusions that you can draw from your sample and the measurements you make. One of the things I forgot to mention is, in addition to the ones that were out here in the outside the 1,000-foot radii, the other thing was we excluded anything where the location was in a building, because we wanted to strictly test the coverage in the outdoor areas. So we eliminated all those as well. So what you're seeing are the ones that are left over.
Which is presumably what Uptown is testing.
Exactly. I mean, that's the plain, you know, the plain language of the contract is 90. There's a standard of 90% or ability to get a connection in 90% of the outdoor areas within the proof of concept.
So Uptown is testing that there's 90% coverage within the blue dots.
Right.
Russell?
Yeah.
Is there any, I read that, but it's been a long time for myself, was there a parameter based on RF signal strength, connectivity, association?
Okay, so there's another good question. So in that clause, it didn't say what a connection meant. But in the clause right before that, it said a connection was 64 kilobits up and down.
And is this the contract, or is this the RFP?
This was in the RFP, so of course we haven't seen the contract. Yeah. Let's see. So where are we? So basically, we've made a bunch of measurements, and there's one of the reasons that what we're talking about tonight is preliminary, is that we haven't really tested how random our selection was on this. We've got most of the low number ones with a couple of missing, but as you get higher in the location numbers, it starts to get sparser, and we've got some high numbered ones, etc. The thing in our favor is that, well, at some point we could just draw a line and say we're not going to consider any of these over that. The first set is a random sample, and we can do all our statistics on that. We might also try to fill in the next few days some of the low number missing ones, with, you know, at the cost of throwing away. But my sense is, as we went to these things, there wasn't any obvious bias in the way we were selecting them. They were nearby. They were all sorts of different distances. There were all sorts of different adjacent to buildings, not adjacent to buildings. So my sense is that our sample, the things that we've measured so far, is probably fine. But we need to test
this is something that will be in the full report.
Right.
We'll address bias and a whole bunch of other statistics that's probably way too much detail for.
Yeah.
Didn't you select them random points at the beginning? So why are they not random now?
Because as soon as you start deciding which of the random points you're going to measure, you've potentially removed the randomness.
So your bias.
In other words, if you pick a bunch of points and then you say, oh well, I'm just gonna measure the ones downtown,
Yeah,
or I'm
right.
gonna measure
Yeah.
95% of the ones downtown, you've removed the bias. Now you've biased it towards downtown.
For some logistical reason.
Right.
But you're
I don't want to go
removing things
downtown
that
and
say,
traffic sucks, so I'm just going to
it's not based on any bias, you're removing things that aren't effectively tested.
All I can say is we haven't consciously biased it in any way.
Yeah. I mean, but we still just want to be careful.
Yeah.
I assume if this is like most RFPs, there's an RFP, there's a winner, there's a pilot, and then there's a contract in that order. That's normally how it's done.
I think there's a contract that's been signed that includes this, there's this space, and the city signs off and they go.
Okay, so normally.
But I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I haven't really read the contract, I have no idea.
And normally a pilot project, they stipulate exactly what the parameters are for successful completion of the pilot project.
Right.
So what my thought here is
Yeah.
that if they're saying we're ready for you to do the testing, there must be a certain area that the city's agreed with MetroFi to the sampling to be done. And
Oh yeah, it's
then
the
you
blue,
have-
it's what's the blue area there.
But it's not even contiguous.
That's true.
That's what the test.
How do you represent, I mean, how would
Well-
you test 90% of a number?
Well, the way, one of the ways is the way we did, which is do a sample and find the ones that fall within those blue areas and measure there.
They did, I mean, you're sure of that. They're saying 90% of those blue samples, 500-foot radiuses.
Yeah.
And they're saying 90, and they're telling the city they'll get 90% coverage.
Well, now, one of the little caveats here is that a lot of the language in the contract refers back to the RFP.
Right.
In the RFP, you know, when there's a sheet at the end, this Appendix A or whatever, that has all sorts of discussion about what they're looking for. And one of the things is this 90% outdoor coverage or connections, 90% of the outdoor area.
Do they specify?
That's,
the
that, wait a minute,
device?
that's, no they don't.
Okay.
That's not a mandatory thing. The 90% outdoor coverage is not mandatory, it's desirable. So they can't hang them on that.
Yeah. So
And if they use a powered device, they could get 90%, even though with a handheld device.
Yeah, well, I mean, so basically what this hypothetical at this stage in the presentation, failure to meet the 90% coverage area, you know, is outdoors. Who's going to take a range extender with them outdoors? Right. I mean, you know, you're walking down the street, you're going to have a laptop. You're not going to have a bunch of, well, you know, with the possible exception of some people here, aren't going to have, you know, rotating high gain antennas on their beanies. You know.
So if they don't specify it.
They don't specify it, which was one of the issues when we were designing this test. You know, what device do we use to do the connection test? Because, like I was saying to somebody before, you know, this ability to connect, a network connection is bidirectional, and it has to be bidirectional. It's not like television or radio, where you just sit there with your receiver and you listen. Something's got to make a round trip or it's not going to work. And so having a high-powered radio on the access point doesn't do you any good if the client that you're trying to connect has a weak radio.
Russell, didn't the original RFP that we all read a billion times call for 90, was it 95% or better second story penetration?
You know, we didn't look at that at all, and I don't even know if that was in the...
They rolled that back. They talked about penetration and number of stories.
Yeah.
And they actually put an addendum that reduced that.
Okay.
But as long as they don't name a client device, they can make anything out of that. If they don't specify the client device, they can put 400 milliwatt radio on there.
Right, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So our approach was to use, and we'll talk about our test
Right, in fact, that's the next thing.
We've used
So-
this 2 dBi, you know, is what this guy is, and
This
Thursday
is what we marched around the city with. And it's,
You guys both have that FBI files
the funny thing is there were two, oh wait a minute, before I go any further, I'll show you the locations we actually measured so far. Turn off those.
Did you guys all have blue jumpsuits and
No.
Nike swooshes on?
Orange jumpsuits.
Okay, I'm just going to leave the orange there because it makes the print easier to see. So right here, this is the central precinct of the police department. And one of them was supposedly in the middle of the street, where we couldn't go to the exact point because, you know, there's like traffic there. We tried to go to an equivalent distance, you know, the nearest safe equivalent line of sight, equivalent distance and so forth.
But sometimes we stood in traffic.
Sometimes we stood in
We
traffic.
kind of have an obsession with
Yeah.
accuracy that's not
So-
in our best interest, maybe.
Yeah, so those are like this one we were practically sitting on a patrol car for about 5 minutes. And no one came, there was one police car, he kind of looked over at us, because I was expecting, you know, like Boston wires and shit, you know. And, you know, people were gonna, I was alert to that possibility, and I was prepared to put my hands in the air. So, but no one really bothered us. We had a few questions, and then after we went out one day in the afternoon, nice sunny day, and people would ask us what we were doing. But when we were downtown the other day, people looked, and little kids asked their parents what the hell that thing was. But they don't know how to just keep moving. They had little glasses on or something. So, so those are the locations. We measured 78 locations. And we did it with, we marched around with this thing. Wait a minute, let me talk about it a little bit. You don't have a little name.
Oh, no, we're ready to go.
You have it in your hand?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's turn around. So this is basically, a Netgear widget, which is this thing that has a whole pile of them that they used to run RootNet Meraki stuff on. It runs Linux. It's got 32 meg RAM, 8 mega flash. The other very nice thing about it is it's got a USB host port on it, which means you can plug all sorts of USB devices into it and they run. So in this case, we've got a 4-port USB hub that has USB audio in it, USB GPS, which goes up here, and a little USB storage device. And with one little slot left over for something that we use for input-output. There's no, you obviously can't see, you don't have a keyboard, you don't have a display. So for a display, we've got this little USB audio thing, and we have it play sounds to us. So it's waiting now. Wait a minute. So our input device is basically a little USB hub or Bluetooth thing. We're not using the Bluetooth. There's no drivers for the Bluetooth thing on. Basically, we stick it in. Linux sees this vendor ID show up on the USB bus. It says, "Oh, I'm supposed to go now." So now you can put it in.
So we'll do this.
You guys do know that even though you have no drivers, the USB device still powers on, and you're still causing interference with your radio. I mean, yeah, that's the way Bluetooth works.
Well, put it in.
It's not a different frequency.
Bluetooth is 2.4. Put it in.
So we're going to test MetroFi. And we're in the proof of coverage area, but we're inside a building. So I'm moving it by the window here to give it a better shot.
And we do have a GPS log.
Yeah, so we'll see. Oh, and this is in GPS.
So we plug it in, and it'll talk to us and tell us what it's doing. So make sure it's starting at 10.
We'll try to associate for 60 seconds, which is like...
And actually a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
So it'll, if it can't get an association, it'll quit when it's done.
Around those 4 amps.
So maybe after this, we can go outside and see if we can get a signal.
Well, or we can tell it to test personal telco.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's not going to work.
It might not pass.
But it'll go through basically every test. It'll give a little feedback about what it's doing, so we have some idea what's going on. Okay, now.
I'm sorry, does it connect to get signal, EI or anything?
What do you mean? Oh yeah. We record a bunch of stuff onto the USB storage.
Yeah, so it does.
Okay.
So it basically, simultaneously, it's collecting GPS data, which helps us figure out where we were.
Okay.
I think ideally, at this stage, looking back, we would have like a data sheet where we write stuff down in a non-volatile fashion. But that would just be one more thing to carry. It was really a pain in the butt carrying it around the day that it rained. We were trying to collect some of the data over here. And I had a laptop with a plastic bag over the top of it, and we had a Cat5 cable running to it. It was kind of a pain. Okay, yeah? Oh, so it gave up.
So it does, so as far as the test, which you didn't get to hear because it's failed to associate,
Right.
is it'll try to associate. First it disassociates, and then it tries to associate for 60 seconds. And if it fails to associate, then it drops out. The next thing it tries to do is get the HCP, and it'll try to get DHCP for what, 120 seconds or something.
10 times.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. 10. So if you know about DHCP, it broadcasts 10 times, and then it waits for a response for a certain amount of time. If it never gets DHCP, then it fails out. But if it gets DHCP, then it tries to pass traffic. It tries to ping Google. If it can't pass traffic, we've got this little script that we've written that kind of gets around their splash page. And so it tries to go through that. If it still can't pass traffic, well then it just can't pass traffic, so it bails out. If it can pass traffic, then it starts a more complicated test. It does a ping test, so we get information on latency and loss. It does a throughput test, so upstream throughput, and it does that using TTCP. And then it does a downstream throughput test by getting a couple files and timing it. And then it records GPS all the while.
And it does a trace route.
It does a trace route, and it grabs the ARC table a couple of times, because we're kind of interested to see, like, what we can infer about the network topology by looking at the trace route data from all the different various points.
Right.
And the ARC data. So that's what it does.
Okay.
If it succeeds, it does all that.
So now, at long last, I'm prepared to reveal the results of the locations that we've measured, which again are these 78 purple dots. And first of all, serendipitously, somehow, we ended up with 39 of them, exactly half, that are actually within the 500-foot radius. And another 39 that are beyond 500 feet, less than 1,000 feet. So in the proof of concept area, and again, this is the caveat about how we're still slightly preliminary on how random our sample is, but we think it's pretty good. Of the 39 we measured, we got connections in 20 of them, and failures in 19. So the failure rate is slightly under half, 49% or so. Now, if you do probability distribution, the probability of MetroFi with that sample, the 19 failures and the 20 connections and 39 tries, the probability, if we have a truly random representative sample, that they meet the 90% threshold is slightly under 1 in a billion. So I think even if our sample's a little off, they're not meeting the 90% threshold.
Russell?
Yes.
When you guys did sampling with your device there,
Yeah.
were you basing that on, say, midway across the sidewalk, on the corner end?
So we did all those dots that were up there before, and as well as these purple ones. We had GPS data to 6 decimal places. And initially I was doing it with a laptop, and eventually we did much better when we didn't have to carry a laptop around. Caleb had a little handheld GPS device.
We'll probably report in the paper too how far off we were.
Well, what I'm saying is the proximity to buildings versus discrete.
We would try to go to exactly the point that was called for in the sample. If it was outdoors and it wasn't, the middle of the freeway, like we purposely, there's several random points ended up along the railroad right-of-way. And it was going to be, A, very complicated to get there, and B, probably isn't technically, publicly accessible anyway. So we bypassed those.
So the bias wasn't toward where a human would likely be, but was just.
We tried to be exactly in the spot that the GPS coordinates told us.
And then
But
random
not
sample.
necessarily where a human might be.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It's
Right.
a mathematical
Exactly.
thing,
Right.
not a-
Exactly. So you're covering the outdoor area, not. Obviously people are going to congregate in a clumpy way and not uniformly over the whole landscape.
Well,
And so we didn't consider that because the plain language is 90% of the coverage area.
Right, and you get back sampling if you were against the building versus maybe out more toward the street. That's what I was getting at.
Right. Well, if it said the point was next to the building, we went next to the building. And if there was a spot that we just couldn't get to, we went to the closest equivalent, from a propagation point of view that we could. Now, there were a few cases where, it ended up in somebody's backyard behind a fence, and obviously no one was home. and we'd go like next to the, or as close as we could get to the fence. And our idea was that we'd have the GPS coordinates of where we actually measured, and we'd be able to potentially filter out ones that were too far away to be representative. Yeah.
So it was explained to me that this additional phase one consisted of like 72 access points registered that were basically 5 by 5 mode. And so that's what this map represents, 2.5 square miles. I mean, it looks
This is the orange area, basically, with the exception of downtown where MetroFi wasn't so expansive. That's the area that's covered by 1,000-foot radiuses around the 72 access points that are on.
Oh, and that's 2.5 square miles right there. That is what the
I don't know.
contract to.
No, that's considered a large.
Well, wait a minute. Mr. GIS will actually tell me how large those areas are. But and I looked before, and there's a query I have to check. It said something like 2,000 or 2,200 acres, but I don't remember the unit for sure. So I'm going to go check on the unit. That's the orange area, and just the purple area is about half that, or the blue area, which I have turned off. So again, we had the 20 connections out of 39 attempts. In the area beyond that, the 500 to 1,000 foot, we had 30 connections, 39 connection locations measured. We had 12 connections between 500 to 1,000 feet, and 27 failures. So this, in the orange only area, which again, you're not quite sure where that is here, the failure rate's like 70%, success rate's about 30%. Overall, within 1,000 feet, the failure, we had 32 connections and 46 failures out of 78 locations. So that's about a 60% failure rate. Let's see, what else do I want to say about that?
Well, one thing I wanted to point out that isn't exactly on that track is that so we've kind of divided our analysis into 3 sections. We're looking at temporal stability or performance. So we did these long-term, a week or longer tests at given locations and collected data continuously. And so we have that part. We have the stumble data, so we can show an interpolated map of power strength across the entire area. That's one deliverable. And then the third deliverable, which we think is kind of the most interesting, is this, which is this random sample approach to what we might call usable coverage. So we can actually come up with the statistic that says this is your, probability of passing the 90% test.
Did you plan to do more points? You had like what, 400 and some?
We weren't sure how many we were going to really need, so our initial target was about 100. And initially we were kind of hoping to get them, well, I was hoping to get them to get enough statistical power in the 500-foot radius. And Caleb, we had a slight disagreement. Caleb thought it was still interesting to go out to 1,000 feet. I, agreed, and we eventually, or we ended up sampling everything out to 1,000 feet. But it means you have fewer samples in each range.
One of the questions we had initially is how many points should we do? Because statistically, usually you would look at your population size and you would choose an appropriate sample based on that. But it's kind of difficult to say what the population size is here, because we're talking about like square footage of an area. It's continuous, and then you have to censor the areas that you can't actually get to and all this. So we just kind of said, how many can we actually do in the very limited time that we have? And we started off by saying, let's try to do 100. And I think at this point, how many have we done?
78.
78. So, but as Russell pointed out, if we treat it with this binomial probability distribution, if we do 150, it's not going to change the number that much. It's all we're going to do is we're going to refine that 1 in a billion to 1 in some even larger number that is.
Well, right. And if their average, the true average is 50%,
right,
the more data we collect, the more vanishingly small the probability that they're going to meet the 90% standard. Because basically the way the statistics work is you're saying, how many random samples could you choose if the network was meeting this standard and get the number of failures we saw? And if you get 19 failures out of 39, the odds are really small that they're making 90%, like 1 in a billion.
So your overall question is when the other company's sample comes out, is compare what did they do?
It'll be interesting to see how they did it. Right.
There was a PC World article that we found just like this last week that seemed to imply that maybe their system for doing this is a guy with a laptop walks on a 100-foot grid in the area. So he walks. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So,
Let Mike get in here.
So you guys talked about the number of connections you made,
Yeah.
but I don't recall you saying about the quality of the connection.
It varied. Some of them were really close. Like the other interesting thing is, it's not strictly a function of distance. We got some long distance ones that worked. That were long. Not quite 1,000 feet, but maybe 800 feet or 700 feet, where they got a connection. There were places within 150 feet that didn't get a connection, or something like that. That might be an exaggeration. But I mean, so there was substantial overlap in the populations versus distance.
Some of this is going to be in our report.
Right.
And we haven't, it takes time to analyze the data.
Do you have a picture of the fails versus the succeeds?
I don't. One of the other things I'll just point out here, most of this clustering you see down here. Battery.
Show the stumble data too, Russell.
Yeah, well, it's a little slow. This stuff was all just random chance that it was clustered. But when we first started out, we were up near Grand High School because it had a big open field and we didn't have to worry about getting run over by cars. And so when we started out, we basically did all the locations up to there's like a sample number 900 in this cluster up here in the corner, up around here. So there's a mixture of, near buildings, where it has line of sight to an AP, doesn't have line of sight to an AP. So again, I don't think there's really any bias there, even though those few sort of high-numbered ones that we wouldn't have really considered initially, I think they are probably pretty representative. Yeah.
I was going to say, I can tell you from my experience that usually if a testing is done on pilot projects like this, it's using House software, air magnet software, those professional software, they don't usually take into account any throughput testing. It's just strictly RF, RSSI testing.
Yeah.
They're doing single strength testing. That's all they're doing.
So we've got
in which case you can have a high signal strength, voltage pathing, you can have
and not passing any traffic. Yeah.
So the parameters have to be put into the success, the parameters of the successful project, and you have to specify the client type of device. I mean, if that's really not in there, then somebody made a huge mistake.
Well, there was, that reminds me, there was an article on the Community Wireless site this morning that I saw. They were promoting Uptown services, and one of the things Uptown was saying at some conference in Texas was that when you test one of these networks, you need to take into account the user experience, which is that's good, I guess. Those guys are testing it. They clearly are not just going to test signal strength because that's not an accurate picture of the user experience.
It was pretty clear that the city of Portland was asking for a connection and not just
so an example of that is 3 years ago, Washington County Beaverton, similar project. We set exact parameters for the client type of device and the true throughput, the percentage coverage. And we only specified 80% coverage on the streets and parking lots, knowing what the client device is going to be. So anyway, that's
Okay, we've also got, we've got stumble data that shows, has different colored or size dots depending on the signal strength measured at that location. That basically covers this whole area, but it takes a long time to load, to like 220,000 points. I could zoom in on an area if somebody wants to see.
So I'm just curious, realistically, most of you at least, have designed pretty complex wireless networks. The Mississippi project. Would any of you in your right mind design it like MetroFi did the downtown area? And your right mind.
In the downtown area with a big,
where your left mind?
Mesh is kind of. But out here on the east side, what we've found, and and we'll back this up more with our report, probably. is that they do pretty well, and there's a lot of areas where these sky pilots doing their meshing thing could perform quite a bit better. All they need to do is increase the density in some places, and maybe there are some areas where they can fix backhaul failures with like point-to-point gear or something like that, and not try to stick to this true mesh thing. Anybody who's worked with wireless networks will say, oh yeah, mesh, that's okay, but that's got its problems.
They already brought in a whole bunch of snow backhauls to fill in.
Right. I noticed some tsunami gear up on 33rd. So we tested this proof of concept. We're like Russell said at the beginning, they're adding access points. So maybe they're going to fix some of this stuff. The question is though, if right now the coverage is 50% based on our numbers, the usable coverage, and what's this uptown services report going to say, and how's the city going to respond to it, and how's MetroFi going to respond to it? I mean, that's the question in my mind, because it's clear that at this point it doesn't include that 90%.
I'd just like to toss out one other observation, that is, one should never build a network in Portland in January, December, January.
When there are no leads.
No leads.
Yeah.
We, for example, at our Hacienda network, we did that. We learned a lesson that come April, your network isn't nearly as good. Now, that may not happen downtown, but we certainly can see that on the east.
Well, the leads are just coming out now. We're finishing our testing, so.
Well, you won't see the same state.
Yeah.
Well, my comment on the 90% outdoor coverage area is this is Portland. Who uses a laptop outside?
Yeah.
Well, in the summer.
Exactly.
Well, but I mean,
who still uses a laptop outside?
Hey, I was using one in the rain.
You're a crackhead.
The thing is, there's going to be some. I mean, it's not completely insane. You can't just write off testing outdoor coverage because, well, first of all, it's intractable to try to test the coverage and go inside every building and get permission to do it. So you have to test something. You test outdoors, and the indoor coverage is going to be some function of the outdoor coverage.
Okay. You notice the press usually quotes, "Oh, the network isn't performing well indoors," but we assume it's better outdoors. There was a thing. Well, actually, the Willamette Week had a little thing on their webpage about that today. And who's measuring it? How well are they doing outdoors? Well, we have a number now. I don't. We're not quite sure it's precisely accurate, but it's pretty clear that they're not doing as well as the claim is. It's not just that outside wall that's filling them up.
There's a question.
Well, I was just going to say, we did some testing right when they came out 2 days after they turned on. Dave and I, if you're scientific, we went the opposite end. Two kind of old guys walking around with laptops in the rain. We took the approach, we took about a 6-block area. And we just kind of wanted to see, gut feel, if it was going to be anything that we could generally count on.
Right.
It's Wi-Fi. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, I think you guys, I heard about a thing you guys did with the Root Network originally where somebody did a demo on their bike. Who was that?
Oh, yeah. Don.
Yeah, and you kind of rode around and and suddenly you go around the corner where you can see and hey, the network comes up.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, and it's the same thing we said, in the New York Times. It's just like the truck. The truckers you see in the back. If you can't see my mirrors, I can't see you. Right. And the bottom line is outdoors, and exactly what we thought we'd see is if you can't see the canister, forget it. So then you can really figure how many people can see the canister, especially when the leads all come out. And we found the only radius where you could actually get connectivity that we would expect, and what we found even without the leads, was that if you're within a few, say, a lot of the canister, or standing on the street, or on the sidewalk, but as soon as you start moving back and you're getting into the foliage, brush, it's just gone. Our rough, totally unscientific take is even outdoor coverage, less than 20% would have signal. I mean, only people who would be able to have any hope of getting indoor coverage are the people who are sitting right at the intersection of the canister.
I wouldn't actually go that far because I've sat in Michael's office with a visible line of sight second story and miserable attempts at
Well,
failures.
I'm not saying that everybody in that zone will make it. You're still going to get multipass and everything else that's going to toast you. But the bottom line is, as far as from our standpoint, we're looking at it as, geez, can we get rid of DSLs here?
Yeah.
I mean, what can we use it for? And we looked at it and said, you know, except in rare occasions or with specialized outdoor antennas where we can block out a lot of the multipass and try to pull a signal in, without a lot of work, it wasn't something that was going to benefit. Now, if the economics, we could work out that they could put this at every intersection, then it would be a totally different thing. But when you're putting it out every other or every fourth or every fifth block,
I have to say they are. I don't know what kind of radios they use in them, but you can hear them a long ways away. We heard one of the access points up here. We were hearing down at the Ross Island Bridge. I think we're getting kicked out or something. So we need to wrap things up.
Well, thanks.
Summarize.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, I got it. You got my summary here. One in a billion. All right.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So we can hold that outside and.
No, I've got it set up for testing.
Okay, good. And I need to. There's Michael. Sorry, Michael brought some widgets, which PTP is going to buy some, and I'm going to buy some.
And we have a few minutes of general business. So
Okay.
thanks, guys.
We need to revisit this when we have
We
2 hours.
We set the TX hour at 15. Or 30.
Go ahead.
Tell us when you consider the open version. But you know, there's no diversity in
So, I'm going to make a general statement. At the last monthly meeting, there was wireless sniffing going on, right? Which happens a lot. Okay, there was a big discussion over the course of the last month about sniffing other people's traffic over wireless. And it seems to happen at every meeting. And I would just, the part of the discussion that I agree with is when you're using your laptop, even if it's wireless, and you're just general surfing, right? You're using a computer the way you would if nobody else was around, that there's an assumption of privacy. And when you're using that website, Google, even if it's not encrypted, and I'm not making any statement about legality or illegality, but I think it's reasonable to assume that there's an assumption of privacy. And I hope you agree. And if you agree with that, and I think it follows from that, that it's worthwhile to get that person's permission or let them know. And if you don't have that kind of permission, then just don't use their traffic. And there's an educational component to that, which Caleb will talk about when he gives his education update. Which is next.
Right. So the education update is that we filmed another video, Kyle and Martin, and not Rick, because he was out of town, so Sam Churchill and Tom Fitz and Russell showed up. We filmed a second video, so those of you who were here last month saw all the films with Rick. This one was on operational security, and we tried to do a video that was like kind of how can Joe Average secure his wireless connection for even the nastiest of attacks. So, if Fitz ever edits it.
I've got it. I actually got it cut. I'm waiting for a sound from you. All right. I'm waiting for other stuff from them. Sure.
That's the education.
What? Real video?
Okay, so my answer for it is we made a big purchase. And the purchase happened tonight. Or 30 of them.
Working with 30.
We bought, personal Telco bought 30 Netgear WGT 634Us for future deployment as new cab replacements.
Or as determined useful.
Or as determined useful. And those are coming from Net Equality. We got a giant store of those. So thanks to them, we got them for cheap. $30 a pop.
I'm going to advertise you to write the check.
Okay. Anything else? We need to know.
Okay.
So that's the end of the March meeting for 2007. Thanks for coming.
Are you done with the display?
You know what? I probably should take it. I'm giving you. And you can put them in the same pile.